Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Thanks very much for joining me today. This is the second part in the series on ISO 20000, which is the service management standard. So I'm delighted that Steve Mason is back again. So hi, Steve.
Hello, Mel. How are you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining us again. So just to recap on the last episode of the ISO show, we covered basically an overview on 20,000. So what it actually is, who can use it and benefit from it. You also provided a bit of an overview of the standard and how it fits with other ISO standards. So that helped to provide us with a bit of an introduction to ISO 20000. And today's podcast, we're going to be diving into the standard itself, I believe.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Before we begin, if any of our listeners haven't subscribed yet, please could you remember to click on subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes? And also if you enjoy listening to these podcasts as much as we enjoy recording them and publishing and getting them out into the public domain for you, if you appreciate those as well, then please do leave us with a review. That really does help us to get out to a wider audience and ensure that other people get to hear about the ISO show too. So there we go. That's my quick plug for the ISO show. So would really appreciate you spending 2 minutes to do that out of your time. Okay, so Steve, if we just pick up where we left off then, do you want to just recap on the main requirements of the standard?
Yeah, sure. Okay. If we look at the standard, it's built on the high-level standard requirements. So you've got clauses 4 to 7, which are the same as all the other standards. There might be just some slight flavourings for service management, and likewise in clause 9 and 10. But when we come to clause 8, this is where we get into the service management proper. And I think it's quite useful to go into this a bit more detail. If we look at the detail that's in clause 8, we've got operation and planning, we've got service portfolio, we've got relationship agreements, and then we go on to supply and demand, and then on to service design, build and transition, and then we go on to, let's just find the next section, resolution fulfillment, and then on to support. So that might be other activities that you need to make your management system work. Okay. But I think what we ought to do is just sort of break this down a little bit, because it's quite complex, and I could overload you with a lot of information today, which might not be the best thing.
That would be great, Steve, because I think ultimately this standard, in terms of the structure, it looks like any other ISO standard, doesn't it? So we've got context of the organisation, leadership, planning, performance evaluation and improvement. So you get that in ISO 9001, 14001 and 27001, the three popular ISO standards. And 20,000 isn't any different, but obviously it's clause 7 and 8 that do stand out, that make the difference.
And I will say that, doing those high-level standard clauses is so important in actually helping you fulfill the requirements that are in clause 8 of this standard. So if you do that properly, then when you come to do clause 8, it's going to flow much more easily in that sense. So don't just ignore them. Do that first and then go on to clause 8.
Okay, great. So before we get into clause 8 then, we mentioned clause 7, which is support of the service management system. Could you just provide an overview on that, please?
Yeah, support the service management system. Then we're really looking at the sort of competency, awareness, communications, and documented information required by the standard. What's useful in this section, I'll go back to some of the earlier bits in a second. What's useful in this section is at 7.5.4 is there's a list of all the documented information that's required in the management system. I only wish that other standards would do this, but this one's actually quite useful.
Yeah, that sounds like gold dust, doesn't it? Yeah, definitely.
It is.
Good tip from the top there, Steve. Well, yeah, I like that.
Well, it's very good in sort of, it's not saying that you have to have all these procedures. It just says documented information. So be very careful of that. So make sure that you've got this information available. It doesn't have to be in writing. It could be on a computer system or anything like that. Just make sure it's available for your management system. And if you can tick all these off, it simply means that you're going to go into your assessment within a certification body and be successful. The other bit, there's one section here called knowledge, which is quite interesting. Doesn't appear in many other standards. It acknowledges that we all hold knowledge in the work we do. And how do we retain that knowledge, particularly if there's a turnover of staff, and we all have that. And how do you ensure the knowledge that's in somebody's head remains within the business? Well, I think when you're dealing with service calls or dealing with customers, make sure things are recorded clearly, that you have perhaps an area where you can record the customer portfolio, or you record any incidents that are occurring, and don't keep anything in your head, just put it all into the system. That way you retain the knowledge. But to back that up, you then go back to the other clauses of competence and awareness. That is all about knowledge. So make sure people are competent to do their job, i.e. they've been trained to do certain things properly, and they can do the job effectively, and also that they're aware of what's happening within the management system, so that they know what their role is within that. And that's all done through effective communication.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think in terms of, that documented information and knowledge sharing, it could actually be video recordings, couldn't it? As well as,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
it doesn't necessarily have to be, policies, procedures, templates. Often, if somebody is more of a visual learner, then actually watching a video of somebody doing it and sharing a screen, how to enter a new contact into a database, for example, or, how to deal with a complaint. All of those things could be done online, couldn't they?
exactly.
With devices like Loom, for example, which we use quite a lot here at Blackmores.
Yeah. And also some of the service desk tools you can get nowadays. If I take one, for example, ServiceNow, that already builds in process flows for you, which you can adapt to the way you do the things. So that saves you having to write an actual document because it's already built into the system. So if I'm new to the system and I want to know how change management works, I click on the button that gives me more information, and there's a process flow there. And that's just already built into the system that you've then had to calibrate to your needs.
Okay, great. So moving on to clause 8. So this is the area that we've highlighted as the key focus really that is quite different to any other ISO standard. So this is where we're focusing purely on operations when it comes to delivery of services.
Exactly, yes.
Could you just talk us through this aspect then, Steve?
Right, okay. So before we actually get going on any sort of service management, you need to plan it properly. There's always that phrase, fail to plan, plan to fail. This is so true with service management. The first thing that comes in, it says, plan the operations. So really, you need to understand what resources you have, what activities there are in the service management to deliver that service to the customer, and ensure that they're coordinated. Not just that this processes fit together, but you've got coordination of teams. You make sure your teams are talking with each other. Now, a very good tip here actually is with the resources, is to think of 5 groups of resources. There's people, there's technology, there's information, finance, and service partners. So if I'm going to be planning my process, my service, I'll be saying to myself, well, okay, what people do I need to do that service? What technology do I need? What information do I need within the company and actually from my customers to be able to deliver that service? Is there going to be any financial outlay in that service? And finally, what service partners do I need? So that these are organizations either outside the business or inside the business that are going to support my service to the customer. And I need to make sure I've got those in place to coordinate things. And if you go with those 5 groups, you'll then find that the rest of clause 8 starts to fall into place. Now, Once we've got that, we can then start to plan our service. So we've understood what we're trying to deliver. Once we've got that, we plan the service by saying, right, okay, how am I going to get from, let's say, my service portfolio of what I want to send out to actually delivering it to a customer? And this is where sometimes process flows can come in quite useful. Look at the flow of the service through the organization. Which departments does it go into? Is there good connection between departments? And at the end of the day, the customer that has just made their order, is the delivery of the service actually going to match the order that they put in at the first place? So look at the whole process. Sales perhaps talking to pre-sales, pre-sales talking to technical, technical talking to delivery, and so on and so forth. Make sure that's all in place. Also, don't forget your service reporting activities. Just so important to have that in place. So my recommendation here, when you're going to plan the service, draw it up as a flow diagram, perhaps on a whiteboard or something like that, or use the old method of sticky tabs all over the place. We've lost that method because we all tend to work from home now, but get in a room, just put the sticky tabs everywhere and just map the service out, and then you know how things are going to fit together.
Great. So what comes up next then, as far as operations are concerned?
Well, once you understand what the process is, you need to begin to control and involve the different parties, the interested parties within the life cycle of your process. So you've understood your process, you've got the life cycle of your process, which isn't just the customer phoning up to delivering the service to the customer, it is actually beyond that. So it might be before the customer phones up, you actually work out what services you're providing, and you'll be continually improving those services and perhaps bringing on new services. And then there's the life cycle at the end. Let's say the customer decides they want to move from one service to another. How are you going to deal with that? Okay, have you got a process in place? Because sometimes you're actually looking after customer assets that you need to return to them at some point. So that's really what you're looking for, is to get that service life cycle sorted out based upon what you planned in the first place. So really, sometimes it's a good idea to think about sort of service level agreements at this stage, although they don't come into full. But typically, what are you going to be delivering to a customer, and how quickly can you deliver it? And also, those delivery level agreements, you've got to make sure that they're sustainable as well.
So this really does help to establish what that relationship looks like then with, I guess, not just with customers, but any other suppliers or key stakeholders in delivering that service as well. That may be part of that service level agreement that you have in place with key stakeholders. It's looking at the interactions then, I guess, of those different relationships and looking at key accountabilities, I guess, as well as who's responsible for what.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, if you get this bit right and really spend some time on this, you can actually give to the salespeople a clear, definitive service that they can go and sell. Because the problem is that if you don't give that to a salesperson and they go off and just sell what they think sounds good, then they'll come back into the office and say, right, I've sold this, and everybody looks at them and says, well, we can't deliver that because we haven't got the resources to deliver that. So it's incumbent upon the people planning the service to come up with a clear strategy that sales can use and go out and sell. And this is sometimes referred to as a service catalogue. And in my view, the service catalogue is probably the most critical document in all of your system. Now, I say document, it doesn't have to be a hard copy document. Most service catalogue nowadays are online. And it's a bit like build your own pizza sort of thing. You go into your pizza restaurant and you get your base, and the pizza restaurant will always say you've got the bread, you've got the cheese, and you've got the tomato puree or whatever you fancy on them. But you can then build on that any other bits and pieces. But everything you put onto that pizza is going to have a cost. Okay, so your salesman's going out selling your company pizza. And then the customer will say, well, I want my pizza to have this, this, and this. And they start adding bits and pieces on, and you get the final cost of the service and what's being delivered. Everybody knows what that customer wants then. So whatever it is you're selling, think of it in the terms of the pizza. You've got the baseline service and then you add bits to it as you go along. It's probably one of the easiest way to explain it, or hopefully it is. Hopefully you've understood what I mean by that. We're not all going to be pizza sellers.
No, I was just thinking about that in context of, although it's making me hungry because we're recording this close to lunchtime now. But apart from that, I was actually thinking about it from Blackmore's point of view. So for our ISO show listeners that don't already know, I'm the managing director of Blackmores, and Steve is a managing consultant here at Blackmores, and we provide services to support organisations to help them to implement ISO management systems and get certified. So what I was thinking there, Steve, was that in terms of this service catalogue, the terminology that's used in this standard, ultimately you can view our services online. You can view the product, so for example, the standards or ISO 20000 and the service that we're providing in relation to that. So for example, it could be
Yeah.
working with an ISOlogist, and there are 7 stages to implementing ISO 20000 that we would support clients with. And then for companies that are already certified to ISO 20000, we've got an ISO support plan. And again, there are different options of services within that, and that could be like a bit of a pick and mix. I guess that's a little bit like the pizza creation that you mentioned. You might want
Very much so. Yes. Yeah.
a little bit of support with management review,
Yes.
maybe a few internal audits here. And so that ultimately that's our service catalogue then. Is that fair to say?
Very much so. Yeah. Because some people just prefer a plain cheese and tomato pizza, and that meets their
Yeah.
needs.
That's like my son. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There are other
Yeah.
people who want all the gubbins on top, and
That's me. Yeah.
um, yeah, so be quite right. Yes, the offerings, our offering is a consultancy, so that's the base. But what flavour that consultancy is depends on the service that's being bought. So anybody can think about that in their own business, and that's what's critical about the service catalogue. And it's quite interesting you point to ours because ours is online, and anybody can go and see that. And we've got some, I guess, baseline prices on the website, which people can then look at and say, is that something I want to explore further? And then, of course, once we come to the agreements, obviously the price gets added together, then you get the full service price, so which you don't always put in your catalogue. So if that makes sense as to how the service catalogue works, that's what makes that important to this part of the business. Because without that, you really can't go out into the wide world selling your services.
Yeah. I mean, it's all common sense, really, at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about this standard is common sense. It's a common sense standard all the way through. So
Yeah. So is there anything else at all that we need to consider for clause 8 then before we wrap up then, Steve?
yeah, for this little tiny bit of clause 8, because we're only looking at clause 8.2, there's 2 other bits and pieces that need to be brought into this. First of all, asset management, and that's asset management on your own side internally as a business. And that should already be looked after if you've already got something like 27001 in place, because you have your asset management system. But think about the assets that you're taking from your customer, and make sure the assets are managed that you take from the customers. That you understand what you're taking, where it's stored, and it's being looked after. If you're an organisation that's got ISO 55001 in place, then that's a very good asset management standard. Then on top of that, the final thing, and this is quite critical, is configuration management. Is understanding how the parts of the service fit together. So you don't sort of disassociate them from each other. You actually say, well, look, once we've done that bit of our service, that will fit into that bit, and that will fit into that bit, sort of thing. So it's about configuration. I'll go into a bit more detail in configuration when we go further into this. When we start talking about change and problem, that's where configuration really plays a part. But typically they're asking you to identify what's known as CIs, they're configuration items. And these are all the things that you need to deliver your service. So we'll dig into that in a bit more detail because that's worth a bit of effort on that one.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think that for now it's been good to get an overview on some of the key differences really with 20,000 compared to other ISO standards, and to give those that are interested in service management a bit of a flavour of what is involved. So it sounds as though there could be another podcast brewing. By the sounds of it, it sounds as though Clause 8 is quite a meaty area that we could explore in further detail, that even if businesses aren't interested in getting certified to 20,000, could take some useful hints and tips from that. And it may be that we do a webinar on this as well in the future. So if anybody's interested in that, please do drop us a line, and we'll see if we can, if we have enough numbers, then we can organise that as well at a later date. So that's great. So any kind of final top tip that you'd like to leave our listeners with then if they're looking at ISO 20,000, Steve?
I think really the top tip with this one is collaboration. It's collaboration and communication, and it's got to have that leadership in it. If you just devolve it down to parties doing the work and just get them to work in silo, it just will not work for you. It's a collaborative standard, this one, and not just inside the business but outside the business. So that's my top tip: collaboration.
Okay, cool. Lovely. Thanks very much then, Steve. And we'll look forward to welcoming you back again, hopefully in the future.
I'll be back, as they say.
Great. Okay, well, I hope everybody enjoyed listening to that episode on ISO 20,000. If this is an area that's new to you and you'd like to find out a bit more information, then please do drop us a line. The contact details will be in the podcast show notes. And we've also got links there to the ISOlogy Hub, which is our online portal, which has got some resources in there on ISO 20,000 as well, like coffee break training and other pieces of information if you're looking at learning more about this particular subject. So thanks once again for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.